plenary panel session is Our Children, Our Future, Health Disparities Among Alaska's Children, Perspectives from Community and Healthcare Providers. So please join me in welcoming this remarkable group of women who will share their expertise, their knowledge, and their observations about what is happening in our communities and some ideas about how we can address those problems. I'm very pleased to welcome Rosemary Ahtuangaruak. She's an Inupiaq mother and grandmother. She works as the environmental manager for the native village of Nuiqsut. Thank you, Rosemary. And Allison Kelliher is an MD. It's a family medicine physician, and she's originally from Nome. She works at the Vitae Integrative Medical Center and Southcentral Foundation's Traditional Healing Clinic as a tribal doctor. Thank you. Waghiyi is Environmental Health and Justice Program Director with Alaska Community Action on Toxics. She is a St. Lawrence Island Yupik mother and grandmother who was born in Savoonga on St. Lawrence Island. Lisa Wade, thank you for being here, is the Health Education and Social Services Division Director and Council Member for Chickaloon Village Traditional Council and mother of the wonderful Aide. Thank you all for being here.
I drew the short straw, so I'll be speaking with you first. Good morning. Dahatne is what my auntie has taught me to say when I'm addressing a group. I'll introduce myself traditionally. My mother's family is from Nolado, and so I'll introduce myself in Dana. Allison Kelliher Seuza, Ina Trudy Dumplings Kelliher, Beuza Ita'a, Patrick Brendan Kelliher, Beuza Hliege Hutana Etzlan, Tanitza Getsit Nite Hutana Etzlan, Nalahado Hutsand, Tsadan Tsalet. My mother's Middle Yukon, Koyukon Athabaskan people come from the middle of the River Clan, and so I feel particularly connected to our rivers, and they of course house our fish, and our tribe is the King Salmon clan, and within that stands for resiliency. And so I just am reminded of that, especially in light of all the changes and all the toxins we're speaking about, just to remember that resiliency that the water and the middle of the River Clan gives us. So just want to also mention that the other clans that keep us balanced are the Beauty Clan, the Caribou Clan above, and then the Bear Clan, the Strength Clan below. My father's family is from Ireland, and they came, about 5 generations ago to the Nome area. And what's really interesting for me is that I've been doing what my mom calls is walking in both worlds. So in this sort of modern Western allopathic training as a physician, I carry that knowledge, but I also keep that balanced with being steeped in my traditional perspective. And so when I was raised, I saw a lot of gold mining around the Nome area. I've worked on a gold mine as a child, and I became very conscious of this experience of how we interact with and use our world and how it can become toxic from our actions or less toxic from our actions. So my work now at both the Vitae Integrative Medical Center and at Southcentral Foundation focuses on working with the individual to detoxify our own personal experience, to be a more genuine version of ourselves, and to really try to connect individually with people to promote health. I also teach about plants. I really believe that plants, I know that plants have an amazing ability to detoxify not just the earth that they grow on by incorporating toxins into their body and transforming them, but also we can eat these plants or use these plants medicinally to promote health, and I'm really very excited about that. My mom always encouraged me to know that what we see in our environment should be respected, and that all things have their own integrity. Everything is alive, and even if we can't speak the same language, to try to respect that everything has its place. So when I think about that from the perspective of toxins, I think about the potential of what we have to learn from our increasingly toxic environment. What could we hear these toxins telling us? I recently heard a story of a tremendous overgrowth of a particular flower in Africa that was just growing in a lake. And they tried to kill the flowers with toxins, and they tried to kill them in all sorts of ways, but the flowers continued to grow despite all the human efforts. And then what happened was a natural flood where the toxins that were in the water were washed out, and then the flowers died back to their normal growth pattern. And that to me is just a really poignant example. It's a gentle example, I think, because we're so distant, that when we listen to our environment and observe the natural occurrences, we can work together to learn how to prevent these toxins from occurring. And then hopefully, through processes like this, we can empower ourselves to live in a less toxic environment and also a more healthy life. So I really look forward to hearing any questions or any other specific things that come up after we've introduced our panel. So Anabasi, Anamasi, Hoyana, thank you. Who's next?
I want to thank everyone for coming and giving us a chance to share some of our concerns. I've been working on issues for our small village of Nuiqsut, living next to Prudhoe Bay. But I also want to take a step back. Our first environment is our mothers, and as we grow. My mom really broke the mold as a traditional Inupiaq woman. Her father allowed her to become a hunter and run the dog teams. Traditionally, our women were not allowed to do those types of activities, but my grandfather must have saw the change that was coming, and he allowed her to do that. By allowing her to do that, the importance of protecting our tradition and culture was instilled upon me, and I instilled it upon my children and now my grandchildren. The importance of the time that she was born. In the 30s, we were going through a tremendous decline in our caribou. And there was a tremendous period where our families were starving. In the olden days, our babies could be left behind in the snow as a means of trying to control the needs for our family. And they would give that child up to the lands to protect the family and those that were growing. It's a harsh lifestyle, but even in the hardship of those times, my mom was kept. And she faced the changes that came with those that had come to our lands and waters to look for riches. And she lost both her parents to the epidemics. She was taken and brought to the hospital in Tacoma, Washington, because others felt it was a good thing for her. She was taught English, but the importance of her family at home that wanted her, her seven siblings, that value was not seen in the Western science of modern hospital settings, and they thought it was better for her to stay in that environment. She fought many years to come back home, but she was utilized to teach other Native people about the epidemic that caused her to be in that hospital. She also taught many natives from other regions because she learned to translate in their languages, being in the hospital for so many years. When she came back home, she was sent to be a teacher in the village of Ahtuangaruak because she had learned English. And she punished our people for speaking our traditional language. But the importance of learning to speak with those that were coming to our lands and waters was so very important, and she bears that cost to this day. But that village has told me, just as my mom was an educator for them, I have become an educator. I started talking about the importance of tradition and culture at our local community meetings, not because I wanted to, but because 3 little old ladies came to the village clinic and told me I had to. I would go to our community meetings and talk about the importance of health. That was easy, being a village health aide in a small village when we have doctors that come for maybe 1 to 3 weeks out of the year. They come to us for help. But when you learn about the importance of airway, breathing, and circulation as you're trying to respond in an emergency situation, and you watch people who are having trouble breathing, and you start staying up all night to help people breathe, you start asking a lot of questions, but you can't help but see the tremendous change on our horizon. Our village is named Noksit. It means a beautiful place on the horizon. We have these glorious sunrises and sunsets, but it's at the cost of National Energy Policy Act. The emissions from the oil and gas development process and the changes that are occurring throughout the world is bringing these particulates into our air, into our bodies, and into our future generations. You see the importance of our tradition and culture in feeding our families from our lands and waters. But the science has shown us that there are chemicals that are coming into our foods. And when you're dealing with this national policy that says that they can use a pre-authorization for dispersants, and we depend on the bowhead whale to feed our families, the bowhead could live to be over 100 years. And yet we must follow many different zones where dispersants may be used if there is an adverse event. And yet we fight through the process. When our village suffered the Repsol blowout, it only took a couple hours to have respiratory distress in the whole village. But yet our health director said, don't worry, there's no concerns to health. But when 20 of our babies ended up in respiratory distress, and 10 of them were put on ventilators, you get very active in your local communities, meetings, asking questions, trying to fight the change, because a health impact assessment we fought for 10 years to get, but the politics did not allow us to identify what are the impacts to oil and gas development. These things are very important for us, but we're a whaling culture, and the threats that we're facing with the offshore oil and gas development is a worry I do not want to see happen, because we could not prevent the damages in our own Gulf of Alaska. And our tribal elders spoke to me and told me how people were sickened, especially those that worked with dispersants. Many of them have died, but we could not prevent those people from being exposed in the Gulf of Alaska. When I toured the Gulf, I had come from watching the renewal of counting the bowhead whales, the importance of feeding our families, these very important animals, the cost of food, $14 for a gallon of milk is very different than what you pay for down here and others in other places. But our 24-hour darkness is important because our animals come to us from renewal and we share them throughout the world. Every continent sends birds to our area, and we must protect every mile from where they come to where they go as they renew for us to go back to you. Thank you.
My name is Waghiyi. I'm the daughter of the late John and Della Waghiyi. I'm a St. Lawrence Island Inupiaq grandmother. I'm a mother of 4 boys, and I have 2 granddaughters. I'm the youngest of 6 siblings, and we come from big families. My mother was one of 10, and my father was one of 12. And I'd like to start out by saying that help is not coming fast enough for our people on St. Lawrence Island and in our region. We have a cancer crisis. And this is caused by actions of the rest of the planet, but also from the military contamination, who we welcomed during the Cold War. We welcomed them, our grandfathers volunteered for the Alaska Territorial Guard. Our fathers were in the Alaska National Guard, and we still have young men and women in the military. And our people are very patriotic of our contributions, but now feel betrayed that the military has turned their back on us. I have a lot of gratitude to Alaska Community Action on Toxics and Pam Miller and the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, who has granted our community-based project because the burden of proof was put on us. We've been trying to hold the military accountable since Annie Aloha, a former health aide, started noticing a lot of cancer in our families from one of the formerly used defense sites. The military came and established 2 bases on each end of our island. We're closer to Siberia than mainland Alaska, and Gamble, our community of Gamble today, is on top of the waste site, the school, the playground, the homes, and the municipal buildings. And on the other end is Northeast Cape. And now our families that lived, worked, or camped there have now been displaced because of the military contamination. Since Annie began this work, we have worked closely with our leadership and community. They helped design the research, what data to collect, and it gives us ownership of the data. We're also up against multinational corporations who make these toxic chemicals that Pam talked about. We are being exposed without our consent in our homes, in our workplaces, our children in the schools and playgrounds, and where we live, like communities like Rosemary. This is such a big injustice to me. When I started this work, I was a stay-at-home mom for 6 years, and after my boys were all in school, I started taking computer classes. A lot had changed in those 6 years. And thinking I'll get my degree in accounting. Most of my job experience had been in accounting, but my creator had another plan for me. In October 2002, ACAT did a press release about the PCB levels in the blood of our people on St. Lawrence Island. I read the article, and it really touched me. I knew about all the cancers in our communities and on the island, and I knew about the former 2 bases, but I had never put the 2 together. So I called my brother, who was the tribal president at the time, and he told me about ACAT, the research team, and what they had done. And later the same week, I had a job offer on my answering machine to be the assistant coordinator. And I had to really think about it because I had no experience in this, but it was so personal. Half of my family, my parents and my siblings, half of us have gotten cancer. My parents, my oldest brother, and myself. In 2015, 7, including myself, we had cancer in my family. We've lost so many families to health disparities never seen before in our people until after the military left, but also these persistent organic pollutants. These are words I've never heard before, PCBs and pesticides and heavy metals and massive fuel spills. This has happened because of the military occupation and their activities. We've had to do our own community-based research. We've done environmental and health research so that we can learn, like Annie was questioning, why we were getting so many cancers, low birth weight babies and miscarriages. And Annie tried to get help for our people for 20 years. And she got sent to agency, and agency. And within 20 years came around full circle. And she was here in Anchorage for a women's conference, and Pam Miller was with another organization at the time, heard Annie speak, and the two got together, and basically this is how our island project began, but also how ACAT began, because people were coming to Pam as a last resort, like Annie. Nobody was validating their concerns. We're a small nonprofit organization. We do so much. I have a lot of gratitude to my colleagues and our allies because we need help. Like I mentioned, the health disparities we're seeing, never seen before until after the military left, include not only cancers, reproductive health. We're seeing childhood cancer, birth defects. Alaska has 2 times more birth defects than the lower 48. But our Alaska Native infants in our state have even 2 times more than non-natives in the state of Alaska. We are seeing these health disparities, including neurodevelopment, asthma that you heard of, thyroid disease, heart disease, not only on our island, but that's the biggest concern we hear in our region and throughout the north is cancer. We're being contaminated without our consent. It's environmental violence. We are finding these global contaminants called persistent organic pollutants in our environment, in the glaciers, in the permafrost, in the ice, and they're ending up in our traditional foods, which are so sacred to our people. 70 to 80% of our homes eat traditional foods. As a result of our community-based project, we've come to learn that the bowhead whale, walrus, and seals, which are so important to our people, the rendered oil and the blubber of these marine mammals are so loaded with global contaminants like PCBs at levels we should not be eating them for excess cancer risk. These global contaminants, which you heard about from Pam, arrive in the Arctic through air and ocean currents. An example I'll give is a farm worker in South America applies a pesticide, and within 7 days, they're up here in the Arctic. We're like, as Pam mentioned, a hemispheric sink. Once they come here, they have nowhere else to go but also at the South Pole because it's cold. these multinational corporations, the 80,000 chemicals that are produced and used and applied, only a handful are ever tested for their safety. These corporations are driven by profit and do not take our human health into account, let alone communities like mine who live off the land and ocean like we have for many, many generations. St. Lawrence Island, I've heard that we had anywhere from 4,000 to 10,000 of us on our island. St. Lawrence Island, which is located in the northern Bering Sea, we had 32 communities. I don't like to say village. We're a community. We work together. We share everything. And it's a way of life we've lived for many generations. You heard my colleague Allison talk about resilience. The historical trauma from Western contact is something that I've come to hear working with ACAT. And we're going to have some very powerful speakers later on talk about historical trauma. I knew about the trauma in my own family, but I knew within myself how it affected me and my children. And now we have two communities after these tragedies in our communities, whether it was starvation or TB epidemic and others. We now have two communities. Gamble has about 700 people and Savoonga has about 800. And our people are very concerned about how these chemicals are harming our health. Our Savoonga children have the lowest test scores in the Bering Strait School District, which serves 15 communities. This is very alarming to our parents in Savoonga. How can a population that has to have knowledge and wisdom, scientific knowledge and wisdom to live off the land, how to, read the weather, how the ice, we have hundreds of words for ice, the weather patterns and migration patterns, that's all scientific knowledge. And if our children can't learn, how can we pass on our languages, our songs and stories, our creation stories? This work is so important to us, and that's why we're having this. It's going to be first of many to come. And as Pam mentioned, we're going to have work groups, and we need all of you, as civil society, as researchers, as healthcare professionals, as tribal leaders, we need to step forward and take responsibility, and we're part of the solution. We know what's happening in our communities. So that's just an overview and a quick story of what's happening in my community, and we're going to hear a lot more. And I thank you all for coming. I hope that what you learn here, you're able to go back to your communities, whether you're with a federal agency, state agency, or healthcare professionals. We need help and allies, like I mentioned. Help is not coming fast enough for our generation. But if we take measures now for our children, to make sure measures are in place to protect their health and well-being, I feel that in the work that I'm doing, I do this because I'm a grandmother and mother. And it's so important that we put our minds together and find solutions. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank my fellow St. Lawrence Island folks that are here. It's good to see a lot of friends here, and I'm looking forward to meeting new ones. And thank you very much.
Wali Sagan, good morning. It's hard to follow that. Lisa Wade Suzetalan, Totina Eshlan, Ideniana Kayach, Sinsiaran, Tidaketna Ista. My name is Lisa Wade, and I am from Chickalhoon, and I am a tribal citizen. I'm also a member of the Water Clan. My responsibility is to protect the water. And I want to thank Pam and Vi and the rest of the Alaska Community Actions on Toxic staff for finding me worthy of sitting up here today. And I also want to recognize and thank Lee Stefan for allowing me to speak here today. Thank you, Tinen. You know, as a health director, I never thought that I would have to work as hard as I do to protect the health of our people and our children especially. I thought I'd come into my community and support my community in becoming healthier, both physically and emotionally, mentally. But what I found was there were constant pressures in doing that work. And I also never thought that I would be dragged into the environmental world to do some of the work that I've been doing today and have to justify so many of the things that Vi was just talking about. Chickalhoon Village Traditional Council has been fighting resource extraction, in case some of you haven't heard, in the Matanuska-Susitna Valley for several years now. But really, it's gone on a lot longer than that. One of the primary reasons we are doing this is that there are 3 proposed coal mine sites, 22,000 acres in our area, in our ancestral area. And they're directly across from our Yanida'a school, which is the first tribal school operated in Alaska since 1992. And we recognize the negative health impacts that are associated with coal mining and feel like it's our responsibility to ensure that our children have a healthy environment in which to learn and grow. And I'm not really going to talk about the actual direct health impacts because there are a lot of scientific experts that know a lot more about those. But what I really want to talk about are the social determinants of health. Because one of the things that I've come up against in the work that I'm doing is in this recognition that resource extraction projects, which people like to call developments, really what they are is resource down projects. They take from us, right? They impact our social fabrics. They impact our communities. They tear apart our communities. And I've seen that happen firsthand over the past several years. So that's what I want to speak to today. You know, our trauma and health impact story really began about 100 years ago, and this disruption to our natural world, our family systems, and our food sovereignty really has been seriously impacted over the years and had some pretty intense health consequences, physically, psychologically, and emotionally. And it really, you know, you look at communities around Alaska and there are individual stories for all different communities. You know, what Vi was talking about, I can relate to so much of what she was talking about, but it comes in a little bit different form for us. You know, for us it was railroad workers coming in so they could truck the coal out. It was road builders coming in to build roads to get workers up there. It was the military coming in to our community up in Chickalhoon. It was disease, it was alcoholism, it was all of those things that were brought into the community without our consent. And they left real lasting consequences. One of the serious ones, and that's resonating today, I think, on this panel, is that of traditional foods. You know, we have stories and we have all these wonderful photos. We're really blessed to have those photos of some wonderful hunters. And they used to, in our area, we live along a mountain range, and the moose and the sheep and the caribou were plentiful. We had herds of caribou up there. They call it the Nalchina caribou herd. We don't have that anymore. And that's a direct result of that resource extraction in our area. And, you know, people say, well, you know, you have grocery stores. I've actually heard people say, well, you have access to grocery stores. And it's such an oversimplification, because really what we're talking about is it's not just about feeding people physically. You know, the relationship, the reciprocity that we have with our environment is a spiritual connection. My father passed away a couple of years ago, and one of the things that we do is we potlatch and we give away to the people that come help us grieve through our process of letting go. And as part of that, you know, we send out our hunters to go find a moose if that moose sacrifices itself for us. And my nephew went out for the first time, and he was very close with my father, and he was gifted his first moose on that. And the tears that I cried, because it was our culture, it was our values being passed down, and it was so much, it meant so much to me personally that experience, that he had that experience. That doesn't happen as often as it needs to anymore, for a variety of reasons. Those foods, you know, growing up were readily available in my grandmother's time. She talked all the time about her favorite foods and how important they were to her. When people would come to visit us, there was always a pot of something she had prepared on the stove. Used to be moose meat, and then slowly it became, you know, cow meat, and then chicken, whatever. But, you know, it was always something to feed someone, and it was part of that spiritual connection that we have with sharing with each other. That's part of our values. And so after mining and road building and railroad building and the military came through, those animals became thinned out. Our salmon streams were decimated. Chicklin's been working for years on Moose Creek to make reparations. More than, I think, $2 million and thousands of man-hours have gone in to try and repair that stream from where the railroad built they straightened out the stream and took away the natural curves that are in there. Finally, after several years, more than 10 years we've been working on this now, we're seeing salmon going up high again into these wetlands areas up there. Diabetes, food sensitivities, allergies are unfortunately becoming too commonly diagnosed in our children. This is that reliance on store-bought foods, because you know the expensive foods are the good foods, the healthy foods for us. Every year we have to actually drive all the way up to Chittina or Copper Center to our relatives to fish for our Elders Lunch program and for our school, because we don't want to fish all those fish out of Moose Creek until they come back plentiful, because we know how to steward our area. We used to have moose pretty regularly. Now it's a delicacy for people. I can't tell you the last time I heard somebody in my family say, oh, I had caribou the other night, or I had sheep the other night. You know, it's hard to not get bogged down into all the statistics. That's one thing that I find all the time. I get reports that cross my desk as a health director about how we're dying off. You know, our people are dying off. They're dying off due to suicides and all these other violent crimes and everything. And here's what I say about that. Those labels that we're putting on us, those reports aren't helping us. You're hearing here from people that are experts. These are scientists, and they're telling us what we need. The challenge we have is in getting the people that are writing the reports to listen to the communities and the experts and the traditional scientists to tell you how to fix these problems. Our elders are our first scientists. When I want to know something about my environment, I go to the elders. I don't look it up on the computer, right? I ask, what's going on around here with this stream? Have you seen it do this before? Have the animals come back yet? Where are the fish, right? There is a connection between food, culture, values, health, wellness. Right now at our Yanida'a school, our students are back there scraping a moose hide. It was a roadkill moose because we haven't had one recently. They're learning how to do things that we do for health and wellness. They're making drums. They're scraping the hair off. Anybody that's done that knows how much fun that is? But it's good, meaningful work. They're learning to do that. They're speaking their language. That's another thing that was stripped away from us in a social determinant of health, our language. I learned how to pray in my language the other day for the first time because I was from the generation that wasn't really allowed to learn that. And it was a really powerful thing. All of these things are connected. We have many solutions to these challenges. And I want to see, I see people out here writing things down. So I'm hoping you're going to write some solutions, and I'm hoping you're going to take some of these things back. So I don't want to leave you with all the downer things, because that's what happens a lot of times. We wallow in this place of, these are our challenges. So I'm a very solution-focused person. And so I'm going to tell you some of the things that Chickalin's doing, and then I'm going to task you with a couple things, because I'm a taskmaster too. I saw this Facebook meme the other day. It said, I'm not bossy, I have leadership skills. That's me. So since 1992, we have operated a tribal school. We have no funding for that tribal school because the state of Alaska doesn't support tribal schools. This is where we teach those values. We teach about health. We teach about eating traditional foods. We have cooking classes. We do all these things at our tribal school. And we have to scrape together funds for that school every year. Every community should have the ability to educate their children in the way that they need to educate their children. Our children are strong. They could stand up here right now and give a speech way better than I can because they have self-confidence, because we've given that to them. That's how we combat some of those challenges with suicide and substance abuse. We fill them full of other good things. And we take away some of the pressures that everybody's under. So they're practicing our language, learning traditional stewardship about their environment. They go out every year and they clean up trash from Moose Creek. They love it because they know they're making a difference in their community. We teach our children how to steward from the time they're 2 and 3 years old. Our Justice Department is protecting our tribal lands from unauthorized hunting and fishing. Our Environmental Stewardship Department is repairing the environment from past damages. We're growing foods instead of lawns at all of our buildings and our infrastructure. Our Yanida'a students planted 21 apple trees the other day at our community health center. We're working to combat substance abuse challenges in our community by contributing and working with local coalitions, the Alaska Resilience Initiative. I see people here. I'm happy about that. Rock Matsu Coalition, which is the Raising Our Children with Kindness. We're working to teach about the differences that we might have in our communities and how people can work to help support those differences. Safe baby courts, we're finding a space for how to help our families that are in crises in the court system. And we're working really to address child maltreatment statewide. One of the challenges, though, is this issue of social justice, environmental violence. When I go before agencies like, well, I don't even know if it's called an agency, but the Alaska Mental Health Trust, and I'm bringing forth from my heart the research and the wisdom of the people in my community, and I'm told, prove to me that there's a connection between suicide and environmental disruption. Why do I have to prove that? I'm coming to you to tell you that. So I have to go find research, more research, and more research. One of the things that I would ask all of you is to make a space for these scientists. Recognize that there's expertise that doesn't come with the letters PhD at the end of it. That real lived experience in communities is just as powerful, if not more so, because it comes with thousands of years of passed down knowledge on how to take care of our children. Take the pressure off of some of us that are doing this work. Leave room for the possibility that, maybe you don't have all the answers in your scientific world. And maybe what's happening, what's been done for the past 100 years in Alaska, maybe 50, because we probably haven't been working on it that long, is not what we need. And what we need is to shift the paradigm so that we can make space for us to heal our communities in the way that we know we need to heal them. So I would ask all of you to help create those spaces, whether it's, in your classrooms. Invite people in to talk about these experiences, to share their powerful stories. Invite partnerships with ACAT and with other tribes to be part of your processes, your coalitions, your initiatives. And in the political arena, this state is challenging. We have a state that doesn't recognize tribal sovereignty. They won't partner with us unless we sign away our sovereign rights. We cannot do that by our Constitution. We would be selling away our children's sovereignty, and we will not do that. But what that means is that we can't collaborate on projects together to help our children, and we need to be able to do that. So create spaces, become allies, ask how you can make space. One of the things that is encouraging to me is I saw Tiffany down here earlier, and I love that we're creating a space for the youth to come in and share their voice with us and share their experiences. When you want to know something, we always think we have all the answers. Even I, in my bossy pants self, think I have all the answers sometimes. And I am routinely reminded when my daughter tells me the truth. If you want to really make change, ask those children what they need. They're not going to tell you they need a coal mine. They're going to tell you they need healthy spaces. They need good food. They want their traditional foods. My daughter would eat that more than any other food if you give it to her. Every single day she would eat that. That's what we need to do. We need to create those spaces to listen with open hearts. That's part of my new prayer. And I think I've ranted at you enough. I just want to thank you for this opportunity. I see you're all really engaged, and I really appreciate your willingness to come here and to learn how to be part of the solution, because that's what it takes, is like brilliant minds coming together to share, to learn from each other, to learn from these beautiful women that I have so much respect for, and to really have a desire in your heart to do better for the children in our state, our communities. So I say Chinan from my heart to all of you. Chinan. Thank you.
We heard some very powerful stories, and I know we went over, but it's important that we talk about, we hear from the first people of the issues that we're facing, but you heard some wonderful solutions, and as we go forward, I hope that we're able to communicate and hear each other, and we all have something to contribute. Some of us are afraid to speak in front of groups, and please allow others to share. And unless there's any more comments or questions, I think we'll go.
So the question is around plants being able to heal us and whether or not I'll be available for the rest of this conference, and I really appreciate that. Part of my struggle as a physician and as a tribal doctor and as just a regular human is with my schedule. So I don't know if the rest of you struggle with your schedule, but honestly, this morning is a time that I was able to carve out, and I'm really excited about working together in the future to make sure that it's a priority for me to be here for the whole conference. When I think about plants, I think about our traditional plants as being my most strong medicines. But when I think about plants that are offering themselves for harvesting, a lot of the introduced plants here are very potent detoxifiers. So one excellent example is dandelion. So this is a really potent detoxification medicine, natural botanical. It is particularly healthful in the spring when the greens come out, but you can eat the greens and actually the whole plant any time of the year. And what I think is really interesting is that as our environment has become increasingly toxic, we see more and more dandelions. And so that's part of what I mean by that deep listening and that deep relationship. And so when I harvest dandelions, I make sure I do that in the least toxic environment as possible. I actually grow dandelions myself and harvest the roots this time of the year. And so I would split them and dry them and use them as tea.
Can I address that real quick? I want to thank you for recognizing that, and I have a recommendation for you, solution focused. So, we've had this discussion out on the Matsu quite a bit, and one of the things I'm really thankful for is the Matsu Health Foundation has done a lot of work out in our community, kind of identifying what's going on out there. But they've also been really responsive to the fact that we don't want that information layered on us again, so they're protective of that information. They don't distribute it without kind of our approval. And, one of the things I think is really important is for you to come up with a way to actually describe these challenges in a way that doesn't diminish us further. But also, I like some qualitative stories added to it about solutions. We should always be focused on solutions. So here's a challenge, here's something somebody's doing about that. Because we have to balance those things out. Otherwise, all we're doing is we keep saying, this is a problem in this community, this is a problem in this community. One of the things that happens is people deem alcohol as this huge problem for Alaska Native people, when the reality is there are more of us that it isn't a problem for than there are. But it keeps being layered on us as this problem, and then that becomes this overshadowing, self-fulfilling negative prophecy for our people. We are strong, and so those stories of strength and people that are taking action to do things about these problems need to be highlighted and shared, and that way they can be replicated.
I think it's also really important that we've been engaged with research for decades and generations, but we don't own the research that's been done about us. And it's really important that our communities own the research, that we're able to access every piece of that data, that it's community controlled, because many want to come and do research, but our answers are not being addressed. We have many, many questions, and unless you work with us in our communities, we're not going to have our issues addressed. But it also has to be research that's done in a multi-generational way. This process I've been working on around oil and gas, but now our data is being used against us, and now I have to defend against traditional ecological knowledge. That's not appropriate. We shouldn't have to be doing this, but it is because others are doing research, and not everyone wants to do good research. Some are doing research to allow business to continue to be business as usual. But we all can make these changes and make the business that we want to go ahead, growing the goodness for the future generations.
Thank you, Joe, for your comment. We do have good people in state and federal agencies, and Joe is one of those people. But the agencies are very limited as far as a health consultation and health assessment that was done in our populations. It's very difficult when your population is small. We need to find a way to fix that, because our own observations of our health and changes that we're seeing, we are still being discredited. Western science is finally acknowledging our traditional ecological knowledge, like Rosemary mentioned, but when we talk about our own health observations, what we're seeing, the changes in our health, we're still being discredited. So to those that work on these issues, we need to find ways to make change. Thank you.
I know, because they saved my grandfather when I was 5 years old. He was sent home with bone cancer, and I know it's slow, but he lived for 20 years, and we use plants, and you pick them, you pray when you pick them, you pray when you make them, and I actually tasted it, and it's terrible, but honestly, it saved him.
Hi, my name is Sandra Ndegla. I'm with the Environmental Public Health Program, section of epidemiology. And so first I want to thank you all for your testimonies. It's very interesting. I think that the traditional knowledge you all have is very important, and it's not mutually exclusive with science. So I think we can engage and we can have a dialogue. I've been working with the state for 2.5 years now, and what I've seen around me is people who care. They care very much, and they have a lot of respect for traditional knowledge and Alaska Native. And I think they are really trying their best to help. It's not always easy. And it's true that, you know, we look at the numbers and we interpret them to the best of our ability. So I really think we can work together. So to back up what Joe was saying, it's true. I think there is a huge public health effort that has to be done, you know, in Alaska to prevent survivable cancers. That's one thing. That would be a great starting point. And then, you know, it's really sad that, yes, a land that used to be pristine has been contaminated. You know, it's very unfortunate. And we would all like that land to be made whole again, and especially people who live off the land, right? It's what everybody would like, but it's very difficult in our world today to get to that point. So what can we do about it? Well, maybe the best thing to do is to weigh risks and benefits, and I think it's really important to get the message out there that traditional food is the best food you can get. You know, eat marine mammals. Yes, it's true, they are contaminated, but to what levels? You know, are they really harmful levels? Well, truthfully, personally, I do believe that the benefits are much higher than the risks. You know, we encourage people eating fish, you know, the plants that you were talking about, you know, all of that, it's great, and you can't lose that. You know, it's part of what Alaska Native do. It's part of their culture. It's part of their spirituality, and so, you know, I think you can't really let the fear of contaminants do more harm than the contaminants themselves. It's a very difficult topic. You know, how do we do that? How do we clean up the environment? How do we remediate? It's difficult, but right now maybe the best thing to do is to weigh the risks and the benefits. And you know, I was talking to someone at a conference last week, and she was telling me that they are starting to see ricket in Alaska. They had never seen ricket before, and that's because of a lack of vitamin D, and that's because people probably stopped eating marine mammals. You know, it's so. So I think we can work together, and but I think it's important to really be careful about the message we put out there. You know, and that's what I have to say for today.
Thank you for your comments. I'd like to make it clear that our community-based project, we have a right, our communities have a right to know of the contamination issues that we're facing. We provide the data. We don't tell people what to eat and what not to eat. We provide it so that they can make their own informed decisions. We know as a people that our traditional food is still best because it's tied to us culturally, traditionally. If we can't hunt for our foods, it's our identity, then our people will die off. Our people know that, but it's so important that we work on the precautionary principle. ACAT is working to work toward elimination, production, and use of these toxic chemicals, but we also we have to also keep on top of the military remediation. I don't like to say cleanup because it'll never be cleaned up to the way it was, but I just want to make clear, we're not trying to instill fear. You know, this is a community-based project. Our tribal leaders and our communities are peer with our scientists. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. David Carpenter and you know, our staff. There's no hierarchy here. We're partners in this, and Lucy Walanga is one of our former health researchers. So I just want to make clear, we don't tell people what to eat and what not to eat, but we do have a right to know. And I like to stress the importance of the precautionary principle, that we're working toward taking measures to ensure that we don't get exposed or in the first place.
I also want to add, I'm encouraged by your comments about the state wanting to recognize and work collaboratively, because, you know, 4 years ago when I was calling for a health impact assessment regarding the coal mines that were going into our area, I had to fight very hard and to get those. And in the end, we only got a desktop. We didn't even get a comprehensive one to include foods and things like that. So, you know, it is, and even then it was met with opposition by the coal companies. So I'm encouraged that you're saying that, because at the time it took a lot to get traditional ecological knowledge recognized, even to be used in that health impact assessment. And the other thing I would say is, you know, another solution that we would like to see is co-management agreements with the state around the animals and the wildlife and the plants in our areas, because, you know, we know all of the aspects about the streams in our area, and we don't really have any say on those areas. And then the other thing is, there's this notion between rural and urban areas. We're considered urban indigenous peoples. I'm an urbanite. And that's the border of where, you know, my community is. I don't live far enough out that I'm too close to the grocery store, essentially, to be able to harvest foods. And so, you know, that's a real challenge. That impacts our spirituality and our connection to the land. So there are some challenges that we have with the state that are real, tangible challenges. So I'm encouraged to hear you guys are willing to work with us.
We have time for one more question or comment.
Thank you very much. I appreciated all of what all of you had to say. My name is Carol Kwiatkowski. I run a nonprofit organization called the Endocrine Disruption Exchange, and I'll be speaking later about endocrine disruption, the impact of these chemicals on our hormones. But also, we've been involved for many years in the hydraulic fracturing issue that's been going on. We're based in Colorado. And so and I come from a very small town there. The impact of the oil and gas industry on rural communities has been tremendous. And I'm struck by the similarities. We've been looking at, so it started out looking at the chemicals that were used for hydraulic fracturing, and this felt like something very new, and the communities were being run over by this new process. And those chemicals in particular, what might they be causing? And people were impacted with the immediate symptoms of respiratory distress and nosebleeds and headaches and those sorts of things. But particularly, our work is interested in the longer term impacts and the reproductive and the developmental impacts that happen in future generations. And I think, and what we're seeing now is these communities where there's problems with miscarriages and stillbirths and things like that. And again, the numbers aren't high enough to draw attention of the health departments in the states. And I just think that there's a tremendous value in being able to, for you to be able to share your wisdom with this, which is, a big issue nationwide and worldwide right now. There's a lot of attention on it, and it could draw attention to what's going on up here, but also be very helpful to people in these communities that are going through the same thing, that could learn from what you've experienced and understand where should we be directing our research funds and our community funds to help people in this situation.